Meet Helena Cortez, a woman who has gone from beloved wife to unwanted guest in her own home over the course of 7 years of marriage. When she accidentally discovers her husband and mother-in-law's plans to kick her out after the holidays by changing real estate deeds, a dangerous game begins. Helena uncovers not only a plot against herself, but also her architect husband's potentially criminal financial machinations with offshore accounts and suspicious international projects. Stay tuned to find out how an ordinary literature teacher turns into a cold-blooded strategist capable of fighting back against a powerful family. And don't forget to subscribe to see the final denouement of this story of betrayal, fortitude, and new beginnings. The first sign was the whispers. Elena Cortez had become fluent in the language of hushed conversations that ceased when she entered rooms. After 7 years of marriage to Daniel, she'd grown accustomed to his mother Vivian's cold stares and subtle criticisms. But this was different. The whispers carried weight now, like stones being piled one by one until they formed a wall she couldn't see over. Elena set down her coffee mug on the kitchen counter, its ceramic base making a soft clink against the granite. The house, a sprawling Victorian that had been in Daniel's family for generations, seemed to swallow the sound. 3,000 square feet of hardwood floors, crown molding, and history that Vivian never let her forget didn't belong to her. Just visiting, Vivian would say, whenever introducing Elena to her socialite friends, as if 7 years were merely an extended stay. Outside, autumn painted the Massachusetts landscape in flames of orange and red. Elena had once found beauty in the changing seasons, but now the falling leaves only reminded her of things dying, of impermanence. At 34, the lines around her eyes had deepened, not just from age but from strain, the kind that comes from constantly holding yourself together while everything threatens to fall apart. "You're up early." Daniel's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, already dressed in his charcoal suit, the one she'd bought him last Christmas. His dark hair was neatly combed, beard trimmed to precision, every inch the successful architect he'd become. He looked nothing like the man she'd fallen in love with in college, the one with untamed curls who'd sketch buildings on napkins and talk about creating spaces that made people feel something. "Couldn't sleep," Elena replied, watching him pour coffee into his travel mug, the one with his firm's logo, not the matching set they'd received as a wedding gift. "Are you heading to the Westfield project meeting?" Daniel nodded without looking at her, his attention fixed on his phone. "Mother needs me to stop by her place after." "Don't wait up." His mother's place. The guest house on their property, close enough for Vivian to monitor their lives, to slip her influence into the cracks of their marriage. Elena had once suggested they move, find a place of their own, but Daniel had dismissed the idea. "This house is my inheritance," he'd said. "My legacy." As if she weren't part of that legacy, as if she were just passing through. "Daniel," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need to talk. Tonight." He glanced up finally, his eyes, once the warm brown that had made her feel safe, now distant, calculating. About us. About what's happening." She gestured vaguely between them, at the growing void neither acknowledged. He checked his watch. "I've got to go. We'll talk later." The same promise he'd made for months. The front door closed with a finality that echoed through the house. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by appliances they never used for family meals anymore. She ran her fingers along the edge of the counter, feeling the coolness of the stone against her skin. Once, she dreamed of cooking Sunday dinners here, of children's laughter filling the high-ceilinged rooms. Now the house felt like a beautiful mausoleum, preserving the remains of dreams long dead. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mia, her closest friend since they'd met at the community college where Elena taught literature part-time. "Lunch today? Need to see your face." The divorce papers came. Elena texted back a quick confirmation. Mia's imminent divorce was a stark reminder of how quickly a life built with someone could unravel. She set her phone down and headed upstairs to the home office to grade papers before her afternoon class. The office door was ajar, strange, since Daniel always closed it. Inside, his laptop lay open on the desk, forgotten in his rush to leave. Elena moved to close it when an email caught her eye. The subject line read, Property transfer documents. She shouldn't look. She knew this. Privacy was the last fragile boundary they maintained. But something, instinct perhaps, or the culmination of 1,000 small betrayals, made her fingers move across the trackpad. The email was from Daniel's lawyer to both him and Vivian. As discussed, I've prepared the documents to remove Elena Cortez from the property deed. Once finalized, you'll be free to proceed with the eviction if she refuses to leave voluntarily. Given Massachusetts law and the prenuptial agreement, her claim to the property is minimal. I recommend having this conversation after the holidays to avoid complicating family matters during the season. Elena read it 3 times, each word burning into her consciousness. The room tilted slightly, the familiar sensation of panic rising in her chest. The same feeling she'd had at 16 when she'd found her mother unconscious from an overdose. The same crushing weight that had accompanied her father's deportation notice when she was 12. She sat in Daniel's chair, her body suddenly too heavy to support itself. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the email chain, revealing weeks of correspondence, clinical discussions of her removal like she was a problematic tenant, not a wife of 7 years. Vivian's words were the most cutting. Daniel needs a clean break. She's never fit into this family, into our world. The girl has nothing to offer but immigrant sob stories and community college credentials. The girl. After 7 years, still the girl. The scholarship student who'd somehow bewitched Vivian's son. The daughter of Mexican immigrants who'd dared to think she belonged in their blue-blooded world. Elena closed the laptop, her mind racing. They were planning to throw her out after the holidays. How considerate of them to wait until after Christmas. She thought of the prenup she'd signed, naively believing it was just a formality, a protection of Daniel's inheritance that would never be relevant because they'd be together forever. She remembered how her father had frowned when she mentioned it, how he'd wanted her to have a lawyer review it, but she'd been so certain, so stupidly in love. Her hands moved mechanically, opening desk drawers, searching for any other evidence of their plans. In the bottom drawer, beneath folders of architectural sketches, she found a manila envelope. Inside were bank statements, accounts she'd never seen before, transfers to offshore accounts, large sums moving in patterns that made no sense for an architectural firm. Elena wasn't a financial expert, but she'd grown up watching her parents count every penny, learning early the value of money and the 1,000 ways people could hide it. These transactions had the distinct pattern of someone preparing to disappear, or at least to hide assets before a separation. The pieces clicked into place. Daniel's late nights, his secretive phone calls, the business trips that yielded no souvenirs or stories. She'd attributed it all to marital strain, to his ambition, to anything but the truth. He was preparing to cut her loose, to erase her from his life as if she'd never existed. Elena replaced everything exactly as she'd found it, a skill honed from years of navigating Vivian's scrutiny of her housekeeping. She moved through the motions of her morning routine, shower, dress, apply makeup to hide the darkness under her eyes, while her mind worked furiously. She had no family to turn to. Her father had returned to Mexico after her mother's death 3 years ago, unable to bear the memories or the increasingly hostile political climate. Her younger brother was in his 2nd year at UCLA on a scholarship she'd helped him secure. She would rather live on the streets than burden him with her problems. As she drove to the community college, the fall colors blurred through her tears. She pulled over twice to compose herself, forcing deep breaths into lungs that seemed to have forgotten how to function. By the time she arrived at her office, she had constructed a mask of normalcy, one she'd perfected over years of enduring Vivian's subtle cruelty at family gatherings. "You look like hell," Mia said when they met at the small cafe near campus. At 42, Mia wore her hard-earned wisdom like armor. Divorce number 1 had taught her to protect herself, and number 2 was teaching her to recognize when it was time to walk away. "Thanks. Just what every woman wants to hear." Elena attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mia leaned forward, her bracelets clinking against the table. "Cut the crap, Elena. What's wrong? And don't tell me nothing Because I've known you too long for that bullshit. The concern in Mia's eyes nearly broke Elena's carefully constructed composure. She took a sip of water, buying time, weighing how much to reveal. I found something on Daniel's computer today. They're planning to kick me out, Daniel and Vivian. After the holidays, Mia's expression shifted from concern to fury in an instant. That son of a bitch. And that witch of a mother. I never trusted them. Not from day one. You never told me that, Elena said quietly. Would you have listened? You were so in love, so sure he hung the moon. Mia reached across the table, taking Elena's cold hands in her warm ones. What exactly did you find? Elena recounted the emails, the bank statements, the carefully orchestrated plan to remove her from their lives with minimal obligation. As she spoke, the reality of her situation solidified. She was facing homelessness, humiliation, and a complete dismantling of the life she'd built. You need a lawyer, Mia said firmly. Today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. I signed a prenup. Prenups get challenged all the time. And if he's hiding money, that's fraud. Mia pulled out her phone. My divorce attorney is a shark. She'll eat Daniel and his mother for breakfast. She paused, studying Elena's face. But first, you need to decide if that's what you want. Do you want to fight for a marriage with a man who's plotting behind your back? The question hung between them. Did she? The Daniel she'd fallen in love with, the passionate artist who'd seen beauty in her literary ambitions, who'd held her through the night when her mother died. That man had vanished so gradually she hadn't noticed his disappearance until now. I want. Elena's voice caught. What did she want? Security? Revenge? Justice? I want to not feel like a fool. I want to not be erased. Then we start there. Mia's voice was steel. You document everything. You gather evidence. You prepare for war while pretending everything is normal. Val. The word felt foreign in Elena's mouth. She'd spent her life avoiding conflict, accommodating others, making herself smaller to fit into spaces that weren't designed for her. The thought of fighting back ignited something unfamiliar, a rage she'd suppressed for too long. That evening, Elena returned to the Victorian house with its manicured lawn and imposing presence. She parked her 10-year-old Honda beside Daniel's Tesla, another reminder of the disparity between them, between what they valued. The house was quiet. Daniel wasn't home yet, probably still with Vivian, planning. Elena moved through the rooms with new awareness, seeing not just a house, but a battleground. She took photos of everything. The art they'd collected, the furniture, the renovations she'd overseen while Daniel was traveling. She downloaded banking apps and gathered what financial information she could access. In their bedroom, she opened the safe hidden in Daniel's closet. The combination was his mother's birthday, a detail that should have been a red flag years ago. Inside were passports, birth certificates, the deed to the house, and jewelry that had belonged to his grandmother. Pieces Vivian had promised would be Elena's someday, a promise she now recognized as empty. She photographed everything, careful to leave no trace of her investigation. As she was replacing the documents, her fingers brushed against something at the back of the safe, a small velvet box she didn't recognize. Inside was a diamond necklace, clearly expensive, with a gift receipt dated 2 weeks ago. It wasn't her birthday or their anniversary. It wasn't a gift for her. The final piece clicked into place with devastating clarity. There wasn't just a financial extraction being planned. There was someone else. The late nights, the business trips, the emotional distance. It wasn't just about removing her from the house. It was about making room for her replacement. Elena closed the safe, her movements mechanical. She sat on the edge of the bed, their bed, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to fall apart. She counted the seconds as tears streamed down her face, as her body shook with silent sobs. When the timer on her phone buzzed, she stood, washed her face, and called the number Mia had given her. Patricia Adams' law office, a crisp voice answered. My name is Elena Cortez. Mia Sullivan referred me. I need help. Her voice was steadier than she expected. My husband is planning to leave me and force me out of our home, and I believe he's hiding assets. The appointment was set for the next morning. Elena would have to miss her classes, but for once, her job seemed secondary to survival. That night, Daniel came home late, smelling of expensive scotch and his mother's signature perfume, a scent that had permeated their home for years, marking Vivian's territory. "You're still up," he noted, loosening his tie as he entered the bedroom. Elena looked up from the book she wasn't really reading. "I wanted to talk, remember?" Daniel sighed, a sound so dismissive it made her flinch. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted. Planning my eviction must be tiring work," she thought but didn't say. Instead, she nodded, playing the role of understanding wife one last time. "Of course. Get some rest." He disappeared into the bathroom without kissing her goodnight, a ritual abandoned months ago. Elena listened to the shower run, to the familiar sounds of Daniel's nighttime routine, and felt nothing but a hollow ache where love had once resided. When he emerged and slipped into bed, turning his back to her, she stared at the ceiling and contemplated the strange calm that had settled over her. It wasn't acceptance. It was something harder, colder, the crystallization of resolve. Little did they know, the woman they were plotting to discard wasn't the same girl who had signed that prenup 7 years ago. That girl had been in love, trusting, eager to please. This woman had survived loss, had built a life from nothing before, and could do it again. Little did they know, Elena Cortez was her father's daughter, the man who had crossed deserts and worked 3 jobs to give his children opportunities, who had taught her that dignity wasn't something others could take unless you surrendered it. Little did they know, she had faced worse odds and emerged standing. Little did they know, the war had already begun. Morning came with gray skies and the threat of rain. Elena dressed carefully for her appointment with the attorney, a navy suit she'd worn to interviews, modest pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. Armor of a sort. Daniel had left before dawn for a site visit in New Hampshire, or so he claimed. Elena no longer knew what to believe about his whereabouts, his activities, his life. As she prepared to leave, Vivian appeared at the front door, using her key without knocking, as was her custom. "Elena, there. I didn't expect to find you home." Vivian's voice carried its usual note of disapproval, as if Elena's presence in her son's house was perpetually inconvenient. At 68, Vivian Westfield Richards maintained the rigid posture and critical eye of the Boston society matron she'd been raised to be. Her silver hair was expertly colored and styled, her clothing expensive but understated, her jewelry subtle but unmistakably real. "I have an appointment this morning," Elena replied, gathering her bag and keys, fighting to keep her expression neutral despite the rage bubbling beneath her surface. "An interview, I hope? Daniel mentioned you might be looking for something full-time." The implication was clear. Her part-time teaching position was insufficient, another way in which Elena failed to meet expectations. "Not an interview, no." Elena moved toward the door, unwilling to engage further. Vivian blocked her path subtly, a maneuver she'd perfected over the years. "I was hoping we might have a chat, woman to woman." The irony of this request, from the woman who had never treated her as an equal, was not lost on Elena. "I'm running late, Vivian. Another time, perhaps." "It's about Daniel." Vivian pressed, her perfectly manicured hand resting on Elena's arm, a touch that felt like a brand. "I'm concerned about him. About both of you, really." Elena met her mother-in-law's gaze directly, something she trained herself to do despite the intimidation she'd always felt. "Are you? How thoughtful. But as I said, I'm late for an appointment." A flicker of surprise crossed Vivian's features at the steel in Elena's voice. She withdrew her hand. "Very well. Will you be home this afternoon? I'd like to come by to discuss the holiday arrangements." The holidays, which they were planning to wait until after before throwing her out. The calculation of it all made Elena's stomach turn. "I'm not sure when I'll be back. Best to check with Daniel about those plans." She stepped around Vivian and out the door, feeling the older woman's eyes boring into her back as she walked her car. The rain began to fall as Elena drove to the attorney's office in downtown Boston, fat drops that blurred the windshield despite the wiper's frantic pace. The weather matched her internal landscape. Turbulent, visibility poor, conditions dangerous. Patricia Adams was nothing like Elena had imagined. She'd expected someone like Mia, fierce, expressive, perhaps a bit theatrical. Instead, she found herself across from a petite woman in her 50s with a geometric bob and rimless glasses, whose quiet demeanor belied the reputation that preceded her. "Tell me everything," Patricia said after the preliminaries were complete. "Start with the prenuptial agreement and don't leave anything out." For the next hour, Elena laid bare the architecture of her marriage, the early years of happiness, the growing influence of Vivian, Daniel's gradual transformation from partner to stranger, and finally, the discovered plot to remove her from their lives. Patricia took notes in a precise hand, interrupting occasionally with clarifying questions. When Elena finished, the attorney set down her pen and removed her glasses. "You've been dealt a bad hand, Mrs. Cortez, but you're not without options." Her voice was calm, matter of fact. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, which means the court divides marital property fairly, though not necessarily equally. The prenuptial agreement complicates matters, but if your husband is hiding assets, that's fraud, which could potentially invalidate portions of the agreement. "What do you need from me?" Elena asked, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Evidence. As much as you can gather without alerting them to your knowledge." Patricia replaced her glasses. "All business now. Bank statements, tax returns, property records, evidence of transactions, photographs of valuables in the home, and most importantly, evidence of the hidden accounts you mentioned." Elena nodded, already mentally cataloging what she had and what she still needed to collect. "There's something else you should consider," Patricia continued. "Given what you've told me about your husband's behavior, these mysterious bank transfers, there's a possibility of something more serious than just divorce preparations." "What do you mean?" "Architectural firms deal with large sums of money, municipal contracts, international clients. The pattern you described, offshore accounts, undisclosed cash movements, could indicate financial impropriety beyond marital deception." The implication hung in the air between them. Elena had been so focused on the personal betrayal that she hadn't considered the possibility of professional misconduct. "Are you suggesting Daniel might be involved in something illegal?" Patricia's expression remained neutral. "I'm suggesting we explore all possibilities. If there's evidence of financial crimes, it could significantly impact your position in divorce proceedings or potentially give you leverage to negotiate a more favorable settlement without going to court." Elena left the attorney's office with a detailed action plan and a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. The rain had intensified, turning Boston's streets into glistening rivers, but she barely noticed as she navigated back home, her mind racing with next steps. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Working late. Don't wait up." Another lie to add to the growing collection. Elena didn't bother responding. Instead, she used the unexpected privacy to continue her investigation. In Daniel's home office, she methodically photographed documents, downloaded files, and searched for any additional evidence of the financial irregularities Patricia had found concerning. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Hidden in a password-protected folder, the password, predictably, another variation of Vivian's birth date, were emails between Daniel and investors in Dubai, discussing transactions that seemed to involve large cash payments for expedited approvals on building projects. There were references to special considerations for government officials, coded language that even Elena, with her limited knowledge of business dealings, recognized as potentially describing bribes. She photographed everything, her hands shaking slightly as the magnitude of what she was uncovering became clear. This wasn't just about a husband planning to leave his wife. This was about potentially criminal activity, money laundering, perhaps even corruption. As she was replacing files in Daniel's desk, she heard the front door open. Vivian's voice called out, "Elena? Are you home, dear?" Elena quickly closed the computer, arranged the desk exactly as she'd found it, and stepped into the hallway just as Vivian reached the top of the stairs. "There you are," Vivian said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I thought we might have that chat now." Elena nodded, leading the way downstairs to the kitchen. Neutral territory, or as neutral as any space could be in a house that had never truly felt like hers. She put on water for tea, a ritual that gave her hands something to do besides tremble. I've been thinking about your situation, Vivian began, settling onto a bar stool at the kitchen island, watching Elena's movements with hawkish intensity. My situation? Elena kept her voice level, her back turned as she selected tea bags from the wooden box on the counter. Your marriage, dear. It's no secret that you and Daniel have been struggling. Vivian's voice dripped with false concern. A mother notices these things. Elena set a mug of tea before her mother-in-law, then leaned against the counter opposite her, creating distance. And what have you noticed exactly? If Vivian was surprised by the directness of the question, she didn't show it. I've noticed that you're both unhappy. That perhaps this marriage isn't what either of you expected. She took a delicate sip of tea. There's no shame in admitting when something isn't working, Elena. The audacity to sit in the kitchen of the home she was plotting to remove Elena from, to speak of unhappiness as if it were a mutual condition rather than an orchestrated campaign. It took every ounce of Elena's self-control not to throw the scalding tea in Vivian's perfectly made-up face. Instead, she smiled, a small, knowing expression that caused a flicker of uncertainty to cross Vivian's features. How thoughtful of you to be concerned about my happiness, Vivian. After all these years, it's touching to know you care. Vivian set down her mug, her rings clicking against the ceramic. I've always wanted what's best for Daniel, and by extension for you. Have you? Elena tilted her head slightly. I must have misunderstood all these years. Meaning that your version of what's best has always seemed to involve reminding me of my place, or rather, my lack of one, in your family. Elena maintained her calm demeanor, even as she felt a shift in the power dynamic between them. But please continue. You were saying something about my marriage. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. I simply think it might be easier for everyone if you considered alternative arrangements, before things become unnecessarily complicated or, God forbid, public. And there it was, the threat beneath the concern, the steel hand in the velvet glove. Public. The word that struck fear into the heart of Boston society. The specter of scandal that Vivian Westfield Richards had spent a lifetime avoiding. Public, Elena repeated, savoring the word. That would be unfortunate, wouldn't it? A tense silence stretched between them. Rain lashed against the windows, emphasizing the stillness inside. Finally, Vivian stood, smoothing her already impeccable clothing. Think about what I've said, Elena. A clean break is often the kindest solution for everyone involved. I'm sure we could arrange a comfortable transition for you. How generous, Elena replied, the words coated in ice. I'll give it all the consideration it deserves. After Vivian left, Elena sank onto the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinets, and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she was facing. They wanted to erase her, to remove her from this life as if she'd been nothing more than an unfortunate detour in Daniel's journey. And they expected her to go quietly, to accept whatever scraps they deigned to throw her way. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mia. How did it go with Patricia? Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself before responding. I have a plan, and I need your help. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange dual reality. On the surface, Elena maintained the routines of her life, teaching her classes, grading papers, preparing meals that Daniel rarely ate, engaging in the minimal conversation that now constituted their marriage. Beneath this veneer of normalcy, she was meticulously building her case, gathering evidence, and preparing for the confrontation that would inevitably come. With Mia's help, she secured a small apartment near the community college, a temporary refuge paid for 3 months in advance with money Elena had been saving from her teaching salary. She opened a new bank account at a different bank, began slowly moving her personal belongings to a storage unit, and consulted with Patricia Adams twice more, each time bringing new evidence of Daniel's financial improprieties. What you've uncovered could potentially interest the FBI, Patricia said during their last meeting, reviewing the documents Elena had gathered. These transfers, these communications about expediting international projects, they have all the hallmarks of FCPA violations. FCPA? Elena asked. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It prohibits U.S. businesses from bribing foreign officials to secure contracts. Patricia removed her glasses, fixing Elena with a serious look. If your husband is involved in this kind of activity, the legal consequences could be severe. Prison time, substantial fines. Elena hadn't considered this possibility, that Daniel might face criminal charges. Despite everything, the thought of him in prison sent a chill through her. I don't want to send him to jail. I just want. What do you want, Elena? Patricia asked quietly. Revenge? Security? Justice? The question echoed what Mia had asked her weeks earlier. Elena considered it carefully before answering. I want what I've earned. My share of the life we built together. And I want him to acknowledge what he's done, to me and apparently to others. She paused, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. I don't want to destroy him, but I won't let him destroy me either. Patricia nodded, understanding. Then we use this information as leverage, a negotiation tool. With what you've uncovered, we're in a position to request a very favorable divorce settlement without necessarily involving authorities. She tapped the folder of evidence. Unless, of course, he forces our hand. As Thanksgiving approached, the tension in the house became almost unbearable. Daniel was rarely home, and when he was, he moved through the rooms like a ghost, barely acknowledging Elena's presence. Vivian's visits increased in frequency, each one filled with thinly veiled suggestions about Elena's future, always framed as concern, always carrying the undertone of threat. Elena observed it all with a detachment that surprised her. The pain was still there, buried beneath layers of resolve, but it no longer paralyzed her. She was waiting for the right moment, gathering strength, preparing for the battle she knew was coming. That moment arrived the Sunday before Thanksgiving. Daniel announced over morning coffee that his mother would be joining them to discuss holiday arrangements. Actually, Elena said, setting down her mug with deliberate care, I think it's time we discussed arrangements of a different kind. Daniel looked up sharply, his expression guarded. Meaning I know about the plans to remove me from the house deed. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the diamond necklace that isn't for me. She maintained eye contact, refusing to look away as confusion, then shock, then anger crossed his face. And I know about the Dubai projects and the expedited approvals. The color drained from Daniel's face. You've been going through my things? My computer? Yes. No epaledi, no justification. Just the simple truth. Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You had no right. I had every right. Elena interrupted, her voice steady. As your wife, as the person you've been plotting to discard, as someone who has contributed to this marriage for 7 years while being treated like an unwelcome guest in her own home. You don't understand what you've seen, Daniel said, his voice lowered, eyes darting toward the windows as if someone might be listening. Those business dealings are complicated. They're illegal, Elena stated flatly. Or, at least, they appear to be to my attorney. And, potentially to the FBI, should the information find its way to them. The mention of the FBI hit Daniel like a physical blow. He sank back into his chair, his expression shifting from anger to fear. You wouldn't. I don't want to, Elena said truthfully. That's not why I'm telling you this. What do you want? Money. The question was ugly, reducing years of marriage to a transaction. Elena felt a surge of anger, so pure it almost took her breath away. What I want is dignity. What I want is respect. What I want is for you and your mother to acknowledge that I am not something to be disposed of when inconvenient. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of the young man she'd fallen in love with, the one who seemed to have vanished years ago. Elena, please. You don't know what you're doing. There are people involved who wouldn't take kindly to this information being exposed. I'm well aware of the risks, she replied, which is why I've taken precautions. Everything I've found is secured with multiple people. If anything happens to me, if I'm pressured or threatened, the information goes public immediately. The doorbell rang, announcing Vivian's arrival. Daniel and Elena remained locked in a silent standoff, the weight of what had been revealed hanging between them.